Okay, so welcome to this fifth video. Yes, you'll be very pleased to know it's the last one for this week. Huge topic. So we're looking at monetary policy still. So far we've actually we've looked at attempts by the government to use the supply of money and interest rates to stimulate the economy as required, to actually try and get it to grow, to increase, or to reduce it, or to cool it. And we've looked at how the supply of money can be influenced by the open market operation, i.e. perhaps the buying and selling of government bonds. I'm going to look at technique number 2 now, where the interest rates. Now, central banks often have the task of setting interest rates. Now, it's a key task to get the base rate of interest in the economy. And in the UK, we have a record low base rate for some time now. And it's not just in our country, there's several other countries in the same position. But they need to ensure that the market follows their lead, that the equilibrium rate is the rate set. And this can be really tricky, because although they have some market power, they need to ensure they've got sufficient market power to actually take the lead. And this is managed through the control of liquidity, and is able to influence changes to the price for actually borrowing money. So if we look at these interest rates and we think, well, the central bank, or in our case the Bank of England, it looks to control liquidity of the banks in the economy. So it has to keep them on the margin of sufficient liquidity to operate in. Because what they don't want is the commercial banks like Barclays, Lloyds, whatever, to actually have too much liquidity and therefore be outside the influence and the control of the central bank. So the central bank, Bank of England, really has to keep them on the edge of the liquidity shortage. So they have to go to the central bank to borrow money, so that they're the only place commercial banks can go to get more liquidity and the ability to lend more and to stimulate growth. Now, the central bank operates as a lender of last resorts during periods of liquidity shortage, and they have the freedom to charge basically what they want for access to money. And this technique is actually given them this name of the lender of last resorts. And what this technique is a sales and repurchase agreement, the repros. So they have this unique position, means they have the power to determine the price, the interest rate to lend it at. And it actually has a monopoly as a supplier of the monetary base. So basically, it's the only person you can go to supply money, to supply and control liquidity. Therefore, they have much more freedom to determine prices. So in a monopoly, you either have to pay the price or not get access. So for the commercial banks, you have to pay the interest demanded or not have access to liquidity. So they do pay the price asked, and this has effects of passing on the rest to the economy. So I think we can see here where the central bank actually manipulates the price of interest, the price of money. So if we think about the monetary policy and businesses, and it's really important for businesses because they are affected by monetary policy, because it controls access to loans and the investments which businesses constantly need. Now, the extent to which interest rate fluctuations affect business activity is a function of inelasticity of demand for loans or elasticity. So if there's a large interest rate change, it can affect the demand. So if the price is inelastic or relatively price inelastic. So if there's a large interest rate change, it could affect demand. Small changes have relatively no effect on demand. But there's uncertainty on this level of demand, so we're not certain of how much this demand is going to be for businesses. And there's always this level of uncertainty, and the exact demand is never known. So the change in interest also affects consumers and their access to borrowing money. So it has a knock-on effect for businesses in what the consumers can actually pay for. If we were to pick some targets, there is very much a need to have restrictions, goals, targets on what the government's policy should be for, what level of inflation they should aim for. Because we know we want the economy to grow, we want GDP to rise, but how quickly should it go? And what level of unemployment is acceptable? What are we happy to pick up with? So these first 3 points are all very much interconnected. Now, these affect the way policy instruments are used, and there's political as well as the economic decisions. So it's really important we actually pay attention to politics as well as economics. Equally, that we understand economics is hard enough, but actually it's not sufficient just to study economics without looking at politics as well. We need to understand the different political parties and their different ideas about what techniques they want to use, fiscal policy, monetary policy, the balance between the two, and what targets they aim at. If we look at some rules came up from the Taylor rules, usually we don't see a one fixed rule. Taylor rules is very much focusing on one indicator, actually says it risks a blinkered view of the economy. Not just in the economy, but if we only focus our target from one view, it can actually be quite blinkered on actually to see what success actually looks like. And most economists recommend a Taylor rule approach, which is a mixture of inflation rule, so wanting to see a steady or controlled inflation in the economy, plus some other rule which controls either government or central bank on their behalf, and it's usually either a GDP growth rate or an unemployment target, and how it's controlled. There are monetary policy problems. There are many issues around its use, and monetary policy is quite weak in terms of capacity to make changes both in timing and effect, and it has a very limited effect on businesses and consumers sometimes, and we've seen this in our economy as the interest rates have been brought down to try and stimulate growth. They haven't actually really worked very well, and there's not much more they can do. They need to see other interventions to actually make more use of this. The interest rate change takes sometimes quite a long time, perhaps a couple of years, to take full effect. It's a slow process and it's difficult to time correctly. Multiple rises over a short period of time means not giving enough time for these to actually take their full effect. And in the UK, they are in reality as low as they possibly can be. I don't really think they can really get much lower, and it's going to be really difficult in encouraging any more spending. The first instinct is to reduce interest rates in order to stimulate spending, but when they're as low as they can be, we can be in the situation of actually having a liquidity trap, and we can actually therefore no longer make use of monetary policy to try and stimulate growth, and we have to actually try and look at other types of policy, and we might be looking more towards the fiscal policies. So finally, just to sum up, fiscal and monetary policy, we've looked at both of them. They're two opposites, but we really see the combination between the two. So there's some use for controlling inflation and controlling the interest rates to actually stimulate and control the economy. So make sure you've listened to all 5 videos. You might want to listen to them several times, and then in the session we'll actually look at some activities to build on your knowledge.